All right, so we removed the coolant hard lines off the Z32, and it's actually a pretty common issue. You start pulling back this banjo bolt, look what we have inside of this banjo bolt. A bunch of old RTV silicone, and you bet your butt this poor turbo wasn't getting the coolant it needed. So this is what happens when you either use too much or you're cleaning up something and silicone goes everywhere, the old dried up stuff, and you don't pay attention. Probably from a timing belt job that was done on this particular Z32. It's got some blue RTV in there, but yeah, that won't help your extend the life of your turbo. All right, on this one, guys, this is the one we're doing turbos, getting the JWT Gen 2 GTX 2860s. As you can see, it has the Holley high ram setup on it. Really cool. It's the first time we've seen this on a Z32. So we did some initial testing on the turbos that it had, and those turbos ended up failing while it was on the dyno. So that's why we're replacing the turbos. So we're gonna do that, and we're gonna get some good test results after we do this. So that's the game plan. Turbos are on. Just getting everything plumbed up with the water lines, and then we'll get all the piping back on this thing, exhaust, and then we'll see how it does. We'll put it on the dyno. I'm excited to see that. We've got the Z32 up and running. We replaced the turbos. We're gonna bleed the cooling system, check everything else out. We'll put up in the air, make sure we have no leaks, and do a visual. And once everything checks out, everything looks good, we'll go ahead and we'll throw it on the dyno. All right, so we're underneath the Z, just making sure we have no leaks, make sure everything looks good. No exhaust leaks, no oil leaks, no coolant leaks. This Z didn't have the heater core pipes, the factory ones that provided coolant to the turbos. It was running no water to the previous turbos, which probably didn't help the case of why the turbos were failing. So we added the heater core pipes, which is a lot of fun with the Holley Merlin machining intake manifold setup. So that was a pain in the ass. But we got it all hooked up, all the water lines all around, so we're just making sure everything's good and dry. It looks really good. We've got our turbos here, our nice exhaust setup. We've got our wideband sensors here. This car is running an Elite 2500 drive-by-wire setup, so everything looks good. So our next stop is going to be the dyno. All right, here's the other car in red, similar mods, all the breather stuff on a stock intake manifold setup. So trying to make this as apples to apples comparison. Boost is about the same. You can see it's 23.5, 4,700 RPM was where it made peak boost on the Holley high ram, 5,100 on the stock intake manifold setup. And peak power, you can see it's about 28 wheel difference and 80 foot-pounds of torque difference. So significant, right? Again, to be expected with a really short runner intake manifold design, you're going to lose the low end. It comes down to physics at that point. So with boost being nearly identical, you can see that it does make a little bit more boost here, a little lower here, but honestly, look at that. You know, I think the physics portion of the intake manifold design takes over. It's able to fill the cylinders with more air down low. But you can see just the difference in the torque response. So, you know, at 4,000 RPM, let's plot it there. Let's see what we have. Okay, so the stock intake manifold car, let's call it 440 foot-pounds of torque, and the Holley high ram car, 325 foot-pounds of torque. A boost difference, 1.5 pounds, but you can see that it's, you know, 114 foot-pounds of torque more. And for the horsepower, we are seeing about close to 80-90 wheel difference down here at 4,000. Up here where the boost really is very closely matched, again, you can see how the stock intake manifold car does really well. So this is as close as a setup comparison, you know, comparing these two cars on E85, same turbos, all the breather stuff. Really, the only difference is the intake manifold setup. You can see how the stock intake manifold does pretty good, considering. So even though it has longer runners, it still does really well at the higher end as well. So yeah, there you have it. Again, as closely matched as possible as we could get it. Here's the test. Definitely way better than when we initially first started doing testing on it with the old turbos. You know, we've ruled that out of the equation. Everything on the car is working as it should and working really well. The drive-by-wire is really cool setup on it, and you don't need to have an idler control valve, air regulator. The idle stays exactly where you need it. Not that won't do it on the stock setup, but it's just really nice. You can have it all in one package. So, but anyways, there it is. There's our, as close as we can get, comparisons to the two different intake manifold setups with essentially the same modifications. So we removed the fuel pump assembly out of this Z. We were noticing that the fuel pressure was dropping. We were getting to about mid 500 wheel. It does have a Walbro fuel pump in it. It doesn't have our install kit. Besides kind of that rubber debris, you also have a little bit of metallic stuff in there. So whenever you're removing your fuel pump assembly on any car, please visually check down in there. Don't assume it's clean, especially on a car that's, you know, 30 plus years old now. Most of the times when we're doing fuel pump repairs, installations, upgrades, we end up cleaning the entire tank, drain all the fuel out of it. And thankfully the Z32 tanks have drain bolts on either side of the saddle. But this guy, really dirty. So we're gonna clean it out, and we're also gonna test the fuel pump assembly. It's been modified, doesn't have our install kit, so they did a couple modifications that we just want to make sure it's not leaking from one of the brass fittings that was installed. So we're gonna go ahead and do that next. And we're gonna check to make sure, as best as we can, that there are no leaks, that the pump is working, and then we have no leaks from these connections. Especially the one I'm a little concerned with is the one that is in here, the one that they tapped with this fitting, this brass fitting here. So we want to make sure that that's not leaking, because it's providing enough fuel for low 500 wheel, but we're running out. And either it's because we have a clogged filter, because of what's in the tank. There's a lot of material down in there. And then if this is leaking anywhere, we're also going to be losing fuel. If we don't have any leaks, that's fantastic. We're going to verify that. You got to be very careful doing this. All right, here we go. All right. So that looks good. We'll apply a little bit of pressure, and that looks good. No leaks when it's installed in the car. All right. right, so these are the final numbers on the Holly High Ram Z. So we've got it up almost 30 pounds of boost. This shows 30, it's roughly about 28, close to 29 pounds of boost on the data, and ended up with 636 wheel and 572 foot-pounds of torque. Again, that's with the Jim Wolf Gen 2 GTX 2860s. And you know, definitely we would see better horsepower figures and torque figures on the stock manifold, but it did really well overall considering. So the car is leaving here in much better standings for power and response. So that's what counts, and customers should be happy overall. So got a turbo upgrade and fixed the fuel delivery issue. So it did have some fuel delivery problems. Pulled the assembly out. We found there was a lot of debris inside the tank, so we drained all the ethanol out of it, cleaned the tank up, replaced the fuel filter. The customer had relocated the fuel filter to underneath the car near the fuel tank saddle on the left hand side, replaced that, and we also bench tested the fuel pump assembly to make sure there was no leaks with the Walbro conversion that was done on it. We did fix a ground issue on the inside of the assembly. Didn't like that it was grounding to the actual fuel pump assembly canister portion, so we fixed that. We soldered the wire directly into the connection and kept the ground on the outside the same, so that stuff is all good. So we were basically starting to run out of fuel, 100 wheel less horsepower than this, so we're good at where we're at. So we were able to get another 100 wheel by doing those fixes to it. So yeah, so that was good.